Friedrich Nietzsche's magnum opus, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, a book for all and none, stands as a towering monument in the landscape of Western philosophy. Penned between 1883 and 1885. This extraordinary work transcends the boundaries of conventional, philosophical discourse, weaving together poetry, prophecy, and profound insights into the human condition. Through the enigmatic figure of Zarathustra, a sage who descends from his mountain solitude to impart his wisdom to humanity, Nietzsche unveils his most seminal ideas, including the death of God, the Übermensch overman, or beyond man, and the eternal recurrence. The narrative structure of Thus Spoke Zarathustra is as unconventional as its philosophical content. Rather than presenting a systematic treatise, Nietzsche employs a poetic and allegorical style, mirroring the prophetic pronouncements of Zarathustra. The book is divided into 4 parts, each chronicling Zarathustra's encounters with various individuals and his evolving pronouncements on the nature of existence, morality, and the future of humanity. Zarathustra's initial descent from his mountain marks a pivotal moment. Having spent a decade in isolation, contemplating the cosmos and his own inner depths, he feels compelled to share the truths he has discovered. His arrival in the marketplace, however, is met with ridicule and incomprehension. His pronouncements about the Übermensch, a being who transcends the limitations of conventional morality and achieves self-mastery, fall on deaf ears. The people content with their mediocrity and clinging to their comforting illusions are not ready to embrace the radical vision Zarathustra offers. The concept of the death of God forms the bedrock of Zarathustra's teachings. This declaration, often misunderstood as a literal assertion of atheism, signifies the collapse of the traditional metaphysical and moral frameworks that have historically provided meaning and order to human existence. With the erosion of religious faith and the decline of absolute values, humanity is confronted with a profound void. Nietzsche argues that this death creates both a crisis and an opportunity. The loss of external authority necessitates a fundamental reevaluation of values and the creation of new meaning from within. In the wake of this death, Nietzsche posits the Übermensch as the potential successor to the now-defunct God. The Übermensch is not a preordained entity or a utopian ideal, but rather a goal towards which humanity can strive. This individual embodies self-overcoming, a relentless pursuit of personal growth and the transcendence of limitations. Embraces the full spectrum of human experience, including suffering and joy, and affirms life in its totality. He is the creator of his own values, unbound by the constraints of conventional morality or societal expectations. The doctrine of the eternal recurrence presents another challenging yet crucial aspect of Zarathustra's philosophy, this thought. Experiment invites individuals to imagine living their lives with every joy and sorrow, every triumph and failure, an infinite number of times, in precisely the same sequence. The question Zarathustra poses is whether one would embrace this prospect with ecstatic affirmation or with crushing despair. The eternal recurrence serves as a powerful ethical litmus test, urging individuals to live in such a way that they would willingly relive every moment of their existence. It demands a profound acceptance of fate and a wholehearted embrace of the present moment. Throughout his journey, Zarathustra encounters a diverse cast of characters who represent different aspects of humanity's current state. They are the last men, content with their trivial pleasures and incapable of aspiration; the tightrope dancer, symbolizing the precariousness and risk inherent in striving for greatness; and various sages and ascetics who cling to outdated beliefs and values. Zarathustra's interactions with these figures highlight the challenges and resistance that await those who seek to transcend the limitations of the present. Nietzsche masterfully employs vivid imagery and potent metaphors to convey his philosophical ideas. The eagle, representing pride and the ability to soar to great heights, and the serpent, symbolizing wisdom and the acceptance of cyclical time, become recurring motifs associated with Zarathustra. His pronouncements are often delivered in the form of parables and aphorisms, demanding careful contemplation and personal interpretation from the reader. Thus Spoke Zarathustra is not merely a philosophical treatise. It is a profound exploration of the human spirit and its potential for transformation. It is a call to overcome nihilism, to embrace the challenges of existence, and to create meaning in a world devoid of inherent purpose. Zarathustra's journey is a testament to the arduous path of self-discovery, the courage required to forge one's own values. The narrative concludes with Zarathustra's return to his mountain, having planted the seeds of his wisdom among a select few who have begun to understand his message. However, the journey of the Übermensch is not a destination, but a continuous process of becoming. The challenges of overcoming ingrained societal norms and the temptation of complacency remain ever present. The final pages leave the reader with a sense of anticipation, suggesting that the dissemination and realization of Zarathustra's vision are ongoing endeavors. The whispers of his profound teachings continue to echo through the valleys and across the landscapes of human thought, hinting at future awakenings and the potential for humanity to transcend its current limitations and embark on a new era of self-creation and affirmation. The mountain awaits Zarathustra's further descent. The world remains poised on the brink of embracing or rejecting the dawn of the Übermensch. The whispers of his profound teachings continue to echo through the valleys and across the landscapes of human thought, hinting at future awakenings and the potential for humanity to transcend its current limitations and embark on a new era of self-creation and affirmation. The mountain awaits Zarathustra's further descent, and the world remains poised on the brink of embracing or rejecting the dawn of the Übermensch. Years passed in this charged stillness. On his mountain, Zarathustra did not merely wait. He ripened. He conversed with the eagle's pride and the serpent's wisdom. But now their dialogue was deeper, tinged with the gravity of what was to come. He had given humanity the map to a treasure, but he came to understand that the map itself could become an idol, worshipped more than the journey it described. He saw from his peak how his words, intended as liberating hammers, were being fashioned by lesser hands into comfortable cushions, and worse, into new cages. The concepts of Übermensch and eternal recurrence were becoming intellectual playthings for the learned and hollow slogans for the ambitious. They were being severed from the vital, life-affirming terror from which they were born. Down in the lands of men, the so-called higher men, those few who had not scoffed at Zarathustra's initial teachings, had formed circles of discussion. They prided themselves on their understanding, quoting his verses and debating their intricate meanings. They believed themselves to be the vanguard of a new age, yet, in their very devotion, they began to betray him. They sought to codify his fluid wisdom into a rigid doctrine. They built a new church upon the tomb of the old god, with Zarathustra as their unwilling saint. They learned the words of his songs, but forgot the dance. Their affirmation of life was conditional. Their will to power was a subtle desire for influence over others. And their Übermensch was but a more refined, more intellectual version of the same old man. One day, Zarathustra's eagle, returning from a long flight, dropped. At his feet, not a lamb or a fish, but a scroll tied with a silken ribbon. It was an invitation to a great congress in the city of Motley Cow, a gathering of the disciples of Zarathustra to celebrate the anniversary of his first descent. The scroll praised him as the greatest teacher and begged for his presence, so that he might see the fruits of his labor and bestow his blessing upon their new Zarathustrian way of life. A profound nausea, colder and deeper than any he had felt before, seized him. They had turned his fire into ash. They had mistaken the pointing finger for the moon. His love for humanity, a love that was fierce and demanding, compelled him to act. This time, his descent would not be that of a gift-giver or a gentle prophet. He had given them honey, and they had grown accustomed to its sweetness. Now he must bring them the bitterest medicine. He strode down the mountain path not with the lightness of a dancer, but with the deliberate, ground-shaking tread of a coming storm. His face was not alight with the hopeful dawn of his first journey. It was carved with the sharp shadows of a midday sun that reveals all imperfections. He arrived not in the chaotic marketplace, but in the ornate hall where the Congress was being held. The higher men, clad in fine robes, rose in reverent silence as he entered. Their faces shone with self-satisfaction, eager for the praise of their master. They waited for a sermon, for more parables, for a confirmation of their elevated status. Zarathustra walked to the center of the hall, his silence more powerful than any speech they had prepared. He looked at their expectant faces, one by one, and saw not creators, but collectors. Finally he spoke, and his voice was not the song of a bird, but the crack of a whip. "You celebrate me," he began, "but have you overcome yourselves? You recite my words, but have you become a new law unto yourselves? I taught you of the Übermensch, and you have made of him a distant idol to be worshipped. I warned you of the last man, and you have become him only with better vocabulary." A tremor of shock and indignation ran through the hall. These were his champions, the ones who had defended his name against the rabble. Zarathustra raised his hand, silencing their murmurs. "You have mistaken the tightrope for the destination. You've gathered my arrows, polished them, and placed them in a museum, when you should have been forging your own bows you waited for. My blessing, but the only blessing I can give, is this. I have returned not to lead you, but to abandon you. I have come to shatter the idol you have made of me." He pointed towards the great banner behind the stage, which bore his own image. "That is your enemy, that comfortable image of a prophet. To truly follow me, you must lose me. You must even be ashamed of me. You must go your own way, and only when you have all denied me will I return to you." With that, he turned his back on the stunned assembly. He walked out of the hall, leaving behind a silence filled not with reverence, but with the terrifying and fertile chaos of true self-examination. His second and perhaps greatest lesson had just begun. He had taught them of the Creator. Now he had to force them to become creators themselves, alone and without a guide. The world was no longer poised on the brink. Zarathustra had just given it the decisive push. Where it would land, not even he could know. The great hall, once filled with the proud hum of intellectual certainty, was now a vacuum of echoing silence. The void Zarathustra left behind was more profound than the one left by the death of God, for he had been their new deity, and his departure felt like a second, more personal deicide. For long minutes, the higher men stood frozen, their fine robes suddenly feeling like cheap costumes for a play that had been abruptly cancelled. The first sound was not a word, but a sob, a quiet, mournful whimper from a poet in the corner, who had seen his muse turn into a monster. It was followed swiftly by a curse from a stern-faced academic, Magus the scholar, who slammed his fist on a table. His face contorted in a mask of betrayed pride. The spell was broken. The once unified assembly splintered into fragments of raw emotion. Some gathered in furious knots, their voices rising in anger. "Hypocrite," one shouted. "He builds us up only to tear us down for his own amusement." Another added, "This is his greatest vanity, to prove that no one is worthy of his wisdom." They sought solace in their shared resentment, transforming their wounded pride into a shield against the sharp edge of his final lesson. Others simply drifted away, their faces pale and listless, the purpose that had animated them now extinguished, leaving behind the hollowed-out expression of the true nihilist who has lost even the will to find a new faith, but one, a wanderer, named Volton, who had seen empires fall and cities burn, stood apart from the bickering and the despair. The shame of Zarathustra's rebuke had struck him as keenly as anyone else. Yet, underneath the sting, a strange and exhilarating lightness began to bloom in his chest. A slow, deep laugh rumbled up from his belly, a laugh at the sheer, magnificent absurdity of it all. He laughed at their ridiculous congress, at their silken scrolls, at his own foolishness in seeking a master. He felt not the pain of an abandoned child, but the terrifying thrill of a prisoner whose cell door has just been blasted from its hinges. Without a word to anyone, Volton turned, walked out of the hall, and took the dusty road leading out of the city, his destination unknown even to himself. He was finally, truly, on his way. Zarathustra, meanwhile, did not return to his mountain. Instead, he descended further into the heart of the city of Motley Cow, pulling the hood of his cloak over his head. He became a ghost, a silent observer in the very crowds he had once sought to teach. He watched the last men in their marketplaces, bartering for small comforts, seeking fleeting pleasures. Their eyes glazed over with a contentment that was more horrifying than any suffering. He felt the crushing weight of his own solitude, the curse of the one who sees too clearly, who loves humanity too much to leave it to its gentle, suffocating slumber. He was testing his own amor fati, his own ability to love this world not just from a mountain peak, but from within its most mundane and spiritless corners, as he sat by a public fountain. Watching the endless parade of weary faces, a young girl with dirt on her cheeks, no older than 10, approached him. Seeing only a tired old man, she broke her small loaf of bread in half and offered him a piece without a word. Zarathustra looked at her simple, unburdened gesture and act of giving that expected no reward, that was not born of pity or doctrine, but from a pure, unthinking spring of life. In that moment, the child's offering weighed more than all the philosophical treatises of his higher men. It was a moment of pure affirmation, a yes to life that had not been reasoned into existence, but simply was. Days turned into weeks. News reached him in whispers and rumors. Magus, the scholar, had rallied a faction, proclaiming that Zarathustra's betrayal was itself the final, most difficult test, and that the true disciples must now dedicate themselves to decoding its hidden meaning, creating an even more complex web of interpretation. He was building his prison anew, this time with bars of intricate analysis. In the wildlands, Voltan the Wanderer was reportedly seen wrestling a wild boar, not for food, but for the sheer joy of the struggle. His laughter echoing across the plains as he embraced the raw, untamed will to power within him. He was not interpreting the dance. He was dancing. Zarathustra stood one evening on a bridge, looking at his own reflection in the dark water below. His hammer had done its work. The false temple was now rubble, and the dust was beginning to settle. He understood now that the seeds of the Übermensch could never sprout in the cultivated, protected garden of a school or a movement. They could only grow in the wilderness of individual souls, watered by solitude and hardened by struggle. He had not failed. He had merely succeeded in a way he had not anticipated. His work here, in the suffocating press of humanity, was done for now. He had shattered the crutches, and now he had to let them learn to walk, to stumble, and to perhaps one day leap. As he finally turned his footsteps back towards the distant silhouette of his mountain, a quiet strength settled in his heart. He was not leaving them behind. He was setting them free. The age of the prophet was over. The age of the hammer had served its purpose. Now began the long, silent, and terrifying age of the leap, and the sky had never looked so vast, nor so empty, nor so full of possibility. The seasons turned on Zarathustra's mountain. Winter scoured the peaks with a fury that mirrored the philosopher's own spirit. Summer baked the rocks into a stubborn resilience. Zarathustra himself grew more silent, more elemental. He did not merely live in solitude, he became it. His thoughts were no longer a river of words, but a glacier of immense, not slow-moving pressure, carving new valleys within his own soul. He had set his task for the world below, and now his task was to become hard and clear enough to endure its outcome, whatever it might be. His eagle, soaring on the high winds, and his serpent coiled in the warm ancient stone became his senses. They brought him visions and tidings from the world of men. The school founded by Magus the Scholar, now called the Academy of the Abyss, had grown famous. Its members did not attempt to leap. Instead, they had become master cartographers of the chasm. They wrote voluminous texts on the psychology of the void, the sociology of the fall, and the ethics of vertigo. They prided themselves on their courage to stare into the abyss, and in doing so, never moved an inch. They had turned Zarathustra's most dangerous idea into a safe, tenured academic discipline in the wild borderlands. Voltan the Wanderer had also amassed a following known as the Wolf Brothers. They had taken the will to power as a license for plunder. They swept through villages not as creators of new values, but as a plague of locusts, consuming and destroying. They mistook their own unbridled appetites for strength, their cruelty for the hardness Zarathustra had preached. They roared his name as they rode, making it a curse word, a synonym for mindless destruction. They had embraced the chaos of the Dionysian, but had utterly missed the creative, shaping tension of the Apollonian. And so, the name of Zarathustra became a thing of dread and ridicule in the world. To the common people, his children were either gloomy madmen who talked only of despair, or savage beasts who brought fire and sword. He was the philosopher of sorrow and the prophet of ruin. Mothers used his name to frighten their children into obedience. Zarathustra, on his mountain, heard these echoes of his legacy and felt a loneliness so profound it threatened to turn the very marrow of his bones to ice. He had wanted to give man wings, and they had fashioned them into either chains or claws. Then, a new figure emerged from the chaos. He came neither from the academy nor the wilderness. He was a man with a soft voice and kind eyes, who called himself simply the shepherd. He walked among the people in the towns ravaged by Vulcan, and in the cities paralyzed by the intellectual despair spread by Magus's school. He spoke Zarathustra's words, but he coated them in honey. Zarathustra, the great, stern father, gave you a hard path, the shepherd would say, his voice resonating with compassion, but I have come to show you the gentler way. He spoke of the Übermensch not as a solitary, self-overcoming creator, but as a harmonious collective, a flock of better men who would rise together. He spoke of the eternal recurrence not as a terrifying burden of affirmation, but as a comforting promise of infinite chances to get it right. He offered a community leap, where all would hold hands, supported by the faith of the group, ensuring no one would fall. He was selling safety nets, woven from the very threads of the philosophy of danger. He was the spirit of gravity in its most insidious form, promising flight while ensuring no one's feet ever left the ground. When the serpent brought this news to Zarathustra, describing the throngs who flocked to hear this soothing perversion of his truth, a cold fire ignited in the philosopher's heart. The misinterpretations of Magus and Vulcan were honest failures, the failures of men who had aimed for the sun and had fallen short or been burned. But this shepherd, this was a conscious lie. This was the deliberate domestication of a wild thing, the castration of a god. This was the spirit of the last man, having been overthrown, now returning in the guise of a priest, offering the most comfortable and certain path into the abyss. Zarathustra rose. His years of crystalline solitude shattered in an instant. The eagle shrieked from above, and the serpent coiled at his feet, both sensing the shift. The time for observation was over. The hammer had been for the old brittle idols. The leap had been a test for the few who might be strong. But for this new sickness, this sweet poison that mimicked health, this compassionate lie that was more deadly than any harsh truth, a different approach was needed. Would descend one last time, not as a teacher, not as a destroyer of stone, but as a physician with a cauterizing flame. He had to burn this plague out of the heart of humanity, even if it meant burning the heart itself. His third descent would be a war, of course. Here is the continuation in English. With the fury of a silent avalanche, Zarathustra descended. This time there was no pause to contemplate the sun or to converse with the creatures of the path. Every step was driven by a cold urgency, the urgency of a physician rushing to a patient whose poison does not kill, but paralyzes, petrifying the soul in a smile of contentment. He crossed the lands like a phantom, invisible to a world bewitched by the shepherd's lullaby. He could feel the sickness in the air, a cloying sweetness, the peace of herds, the stillness that precedes not creation, but stagnation. His journey ended in a green valley, a place called the Meadow of Solace. There the shepherd was holding his festival of the gentle leap. The scene before Zarathustra was one of nauseating perfection. Smiling families shared bread on picnic blankets, children wove garlands of flowers, and soft music drifted on the air. It was a paradise of domesticity. Banners hung from the trees, proclaiming strength in unity and ascension through compassion. It was the antithesis of everything his rugged mountain soul represented. In the center of the valley, on a dais of manicured grass, stood the shepherd. He was charismatic, with a face that radiated serene sincerity and eyes that promised relief from all burdens. His voice, amplified by a natural acoustic, was a balm. He was telling the parable of the lost sheep humanity, which, frightened and alone, was found and brought back to the flock by a caring shepherd himself. He promised them they would cross the chasm together, safely. For the love of the flock was the strongest bridge. Zarathustra did not storm the stage. He did not scream. With his mantle hiding his sun and frost-weathered face, he walked into the middle of the crowd, an anonymous face among thousands, a silent stone in a river of emotion. He waited, motionless, for the shepherd to finish his sermon of milk and honey, as the valley erupted in applause and grateful tears. A single voice, clear, cold, and sharp as mountain air pierced the warmth. It was not a shout, but a question, thrown with the precision of an arrow. "Shepherd, you who care so deeply for your flock, tell me, what becomes of the eagle in your sheep pen?" The crowd hushed, turning to find the source of the dissonance. The shepherd, momentarily startled, quickly recovered his compassionate smile. "The eagle is a noble bird, my friend, but a lonely one," he answered, his voice slick with confidence. "In our flock, he would learn the warmth of belonging. He would not need to hunt, for we would share our bread. His sharp talons would soften, and he would learn to walk among us as a brother." The crowd sighed in approval at this beautiful image of peace. Zarathustra's voice rang out again, a little louder, sharper, and his wings shepherd. "What becomes of the wings of an eagle that learns to walk and eat bread?" Through the crowd, the shepherd's smile tightened. His wings would become a memory of a lonely past, symbol of the pride he has wisely traded for the joy of community. At that, Zarathustra's voice exploded in a roar, not the roar of an animal, but of a storm breaking over a calm sea, the voice that had once announced the death of God. "Liar, you would not soften his talons, you would break them. You would not teach him to walk, you would chain him to the ground. You call this a community, but it is a cage for all who might fly. You promise a gentle leap, but you are merely digging a more comfortable grave. You are the high priest of the last man, selling the death of the soul and calling it love." He turned from the stunned shepherd to the crowd. His hood fell back, revealing the face of an ancient prophet, and his eyes burned with a terrible fire. "Look at your hands. Are they calloused from creating new worlds, or are they soft from applauding your own diminishment? He offers you comfort, and I offer you a sword. The sword is your own will. With it, you must cut the ropes of this shepherd and carve your own path out of the rock of your own being. Choose the gentle sleep in the abyss or the terrifying dawn. On a peak, you have conquered for yourselves." A profound, terrified silence fell over the valley. The shepherd's smile was gone, replaced by a mask of cold fury. The war had begun, not with a clash of armies, but with a choice, now laid bare and unavoidable. In the heart of every person present, the silence in the valley was a living thing, taut membrane stretched between two opposing worlds. The sun beat down, the soft music had died, and 1,000 hearts hammered in a rhythm of pure terror. For a moment, no one breathed. They were caught in the gravitational pull of two suns, one that promised warmth and gentle light, and one that burned with a fire that could forge or incinerate. The choice Zarathustra had laid before them was not an idea. It was a physical presence in the air, a chasm that had opened at their very feet. The shepherd was the first to regain his voice, but the honey was gone, replaced by venom. His compassionate face twisted into a snarl of righteous fury. He pointed a trembling finger at the old prophet. "Behold the true enemy," he shrieked, his voice sharp and piercing. "The apostle of agony, the prophet of pain. He offers you a sword only so you may fall upon it. He speaks of peaks only because he despises the gentle warmth of the valley where real people live and love." He took a step forward, his authority returning as he channeled the crowd's fear. "He calls your love a cage and your community a grave. He wants you alone, shivering and bleeding on his barren mountains. Is that strength? Is that freedom? No. It is the pinnacle of cruelty. He is not a man, he is a wolf in prophet's rags, come to scatter the flock and devour the stragglers. He loves your suffering, for it proves his bitter philosophy. The effect was instantaneous. The crowd, desperate for a release from the terrible tension of choice, seized upon the familiar comfort of anger. A low murmur rippled through them, swelling into a hostile growl. They turned their eyes away from their own trembling hands and towards Zarathustra. In him, they no longer saw a challenger, but a threat. The profound fear of his freedom transmuted into a burning hatred for the man who had offered it. The herd, when faced with the eagle, had chosen to side with the cage. A father clutched his son tighter, glaring at Zarathustra as if he were a plague. A woman who had wept tears of joy at the shepherd's words now wept tears of fear. Yet near the edge of the crowd, a young stonemason, a man whose hands were already hard and calloused, looked from his own hands to Zarathustra, and then back to the soft, pleading face of the shepherd. A flicker of shame, quickly followed by a spark of resolve ignited in his eyes. He did not join the angry chorus. He quietly took a step back, separating himself from the coalescing mob. Zarathustra watched them. He did not flinch before their rising fury. He offered no rebuttal, no further defense of his truth. His face held no anger, no disappointment, but only a vast ancient sadness. He had held up a mirror, and they had chosen to shatter it rather than gaze upon their own reflection. They had made their choice. And so, he turned his back on them. This was his final act in the battle for the valley. He simply turned and walked away. The crowd, now a single entity of rage, parted before him, a wave of humanity breaking against a solitary rock. They jeered. They cursed. Some even threw clumps of soft turf and flowers at his retreating figure, the only projectiles their comfortable world could offer. Their anger was as soft as the life they defended. Zarathustra did not look back. Steps were. Even and unhurried as he left the green valley and began to climb the rocky scree of the opposing hills. As his figure grew smaller, the young stonemason who had stepped away slipped out of the crowd and began his own ascent. Not on the path Zarathustra took, but on a different, unblazed trail. He was not following, he was beginning. Back in the valley, the shepherd, his victory absolute, raised his arms. His voice, once again, a soothing balm, washed over his flock. He gathered them close, his words now laced with the iron authority of one who has protected his people from a great and terrible evil. They huddled together, bound now not only by their shared love of comfort, but by a shared and manufactured hatred of the wilderness outside and the terrible freedom it represented. The war for the meadow of solace was over, but the silent individual. Wars it had just ignited in the scattered souls who had truly heard. The call had only just begun. The end of Zarathustra's song years, perhaps decades, passed. From his mountain, which was now less a refuge and more a part of his own being, Zarathustra observed, the world had not forgotten him. On the contrary, his name was everywhere, but his truth was nowhere. The shepherd, with his cunning wisdom, had triumphed. The meadow of solace became the center of a new faith, the most successful and stable the world had ever known. Spread, not by the sword, but by comfort, offering communal purpose, clear morality, and above all, protection from the terrifying loneliness of freedom. Zarathustra became the demonic figure in their doctrine, the great tempter. The spirit of pride and chaos who sought to lead souls into the desert of suffering. Volton's wolf brothers were hunted down like beasts, their atrocities serving as perfect proof of the shepherd's wisdom. Megus's Academy of the Abyss withered into irrelevance. An esoteric cult for melancholy intellectuals, occasionally pointed to as an example of the paralysis that awaited those who rejected the community. The shepherd society was safe, prosperous, and profoundly mediocre. The last man had found his final paradise. Zarathustra did not descend again. The war was over, and he had lost it in every sense the world recognized as victory. In his vast and final solitude, he traced the arc of his journey, not with regret, but with the sharp clarity of a winter star. He remembered his first descent, his heart full of a solar hope, bringing the news of God's death as a gift. He offered man the ideal of the Übermensch, the creator who would dance upon the abyss of nihilism. But man, too small, only blinked at the sun, fearing its light and heat, and scurried for shadows and petty comforts. He recalled his second descent. No longer with a gift, but with a hammer. He went to his higher men, those who thought they followed him, and shattered the idol they had made of him. He forced them to confront themselves. But from this freedom, monsters were born. The intellectual paralysis of Magus and the instinctual brutality of Voltan, proving that even the best seed cannot flourish in unprepared soil. He relived his third and final descent, the war against the shepherd. There he offered no more wisdom or challenges, but a final naked choice, terrifying, truth or compassionate falsehood. And he watched without illusion as humanity, in its vast majority, ran into the warm arms of the lie, cursing the one who showed them their chains. This was the realistic end to his song. The truth of a philosopher does not reshape the world. In its own image, the world absorbs what it can, domesticates what is wild, and turns the dangerous into either a fairy tale or a horror story. The mass of humanity does not seek overcoming, but preservation. And yet, in that final understanding lay the philosophical triumph. Zarathustra's success was never in the valley among the crowds. His legacy was not the shepherd's faith, but the silence of the stonemason who chose his own path up the mountain. His victory was in the solitary scholar, centuries later, who would find a forbidden fragment of his writings and feel their soul catch fire. It was in the artist who, inspired by an echo of his idea, would create a work that challenged and disturbed. Rather than pleased, the Übermensch was not the blueprint for a new society, but the possibility of a new type of individual, as rare as an eagle, who builds their nest on inaccessible peaks. His words were not seeds for a field, but spores carried on the wind, destined to land in unpredictable, solitary places, to perhaps bloom only once a generation. Zarathustra looked at the morning sun bathing the world below, the shepherd's thriving world, the world of his apparent failure. He thought of his entire journey, the hope, the fury, the loneliness, the war, the misunderstanding. And as he embraced it all in his mind, he felt the weight of the eternal recurrence, not as a theory, but as the final test. Would he live it? All again, every step, every mistake, every moment of despair, and every glimpse of truth. A slow smile formed on his weathered face. It was not a smile of joy or sadness, but of an affirmation as vast and deep as the sky itself. Yes, forever he turned. Not to the world, but to the rising sun. No longer a prophet with a message, but a man who had finally become one with his own fate. The song had ended. The silence that followed was philosophy itself, continuing its slow, invisible work.